From its start in 1921, the TTC has always had issues getting projects off the drawing board. From politics to funding, or the project just becoming redundant over time due to aforementioned problems. It's affected pretty much every transit line built in Toronto, from the original Yonge Line to the currently in progress Eglinton Line. Even Go Transit has had issues with this, like the proposed Midtown Line or the Union Pearson Express. Despite what some might tell you, this is not a new issue, nor is it central to Toronto. It's just the sad truth that comes with the miracle that is public transit. However, because of this, we missed out on potential lines like the Eglinton West Subway or the Downtown Relief Line, or whatever transit plan with a gimmicky name made every 5 years that promises us what will be the future in Toronto. But out of all of the proposed transit lines in Toronto, there is one that everybody talks about, the plan that could change everything. One that is causing major issues today, and without a solution could result in chaos. LRT or subway, something needs to be built and needs to happen now, and it's located at Sheppard and Bessarion. This is the story of the Bessarion subway. It sounds ridiculous, but it is true. After all these years, Bessarion Road in North York has never gotten a transit line. Even though a station serving it opened on the Sheppard line in 2002, it is still not enough to serve the masses that use the station every day. Even the Gateway shop at the station had to close due to it getting too crowded. But the station was part one of a two-part system that never arrived. With a street with such potential, it makes sense to have a transit line that would connect riders from the Sheppard line to the paramount destination of Talara Park, located near the highway. No transit line in Toronto has ever had a direct connection to a playground, unless it was a political playground. And had this line been built, residents would no longer have to trek through the elements to enjoy the outdoors. But due to political issues, funding, and a debate on what mode to use, it's kept the shovels further and further away from the ground. So how did we get here? Like anything relating to transit in Toronto, sit down because this is going to be a long one. In 1961, North York was going through changes, as it was still in the progress of going from a countryside to a suburb. The area around Sheppard and Leslie was starting to get a taste of the action, with housing blooming like tulips in the spring. This resulted in the creation or extension of many different streets and roads in the area. One of them was Bessarion Road, a dead-end road that ran from the top of Highway 401 to roughly Sheppard Avenue. More on that later. Which, like the rest of the streets being built, it was being filled up with houses, catering to commuters who worked in Toronto. At the time, there was not much transit in the area. The 84 Sheppard would not come until 1963.
Nope.
The nearest subway station at the time was Eglinton. And though there was the Oriole CNR station, the train service was not commuter friendly. Getting to work was done mostly by car, but for those on Bessarion, even that was difficult. Because it ran from the north edge of Highway 401, then proceeded north, you would think it would have ended at Sheppard Avenue, if it was not for this house in the way.
What?
Many locals hated this roadblock, as it meant having to zigzag through other roads just to get to Sheppard. So many wrote to their local city councillor, and at the time, North York was separately controlled from Toronto, so they took control of the situation. The owner of the house reportedly was reasonable, as long as the city gave him a good price, and planners who did sketches did say it would be an easy fix to connect both Bessarion and Sheppard together. Sadly, opportunism trumped logic. Politicians quickly jumped onto the bandwagon to not only solve the problem, but to do it as expensively as possible. A simple land buyout and road connection was not enough for votes. They needed something better. Talks of an expressway or helicopter ferry service were proposed, but to them were small potatoes. But then, out of the blue, someone brought in the idea of a subway. It was a bold but intelligent idea, as not only would it be bombastic enough to secure their political legacies, but it would also be the biggest waste of funds in Toronto history. One of the politicians to convey this plan drew a sketch of the Bessarion line on the back of a candy wrapper. This plan would have the line start at Shepherd Avenue, just north of the roadblock house, go south on Bessarion, then turn west into Talara Park. They went to the TTC with this idea. However, the TTC refused to build a subway line in the middle of nowhere without a connection to one of its main rapid transit lines and without a yard to house the cars. They also noted that a branch of the 84 Shepherd could theoretically fill this gap and just run bus service on the street, but it fell on deaf ears. Because come on, a bus? At the time, only the planned North Yonge Extension Station, Shepherd, at Yonge and Shepherd, was close enough that they noted that it would require a special bus to connect the two lines efficiently. When a politician suggested they use an LRT to connect both segments, the TTC officials have had enough and threw them out.
Get out!
Back when the TTC was able to do that to politicians, and the project was cancelled before it ever began. The situation was in limbo until the 1970s. Even as the subway got closer, something else also got closer. For in 1975, the house was vacated and Bessarion finally connected to Shepherd with a simple on-time and on-budget project. To the sadness of many politicians, they didn't get to build a massively expensive project. Yet. By the 1980s, though the TTC was having a boom with subway construction, it had gotten expensive, but not too expensive for the likes of city politicians. After the extensions to Kennedy and Kipling, the TTC was looking to find a cheaper mode of transit to reach areas that were too expensive for subway construction. They decided to repurpose the new CLRV streetcars and use them as light rail vehicles on a brand new line that ran between Kennedy Station and the Scarborough Town Center. However, this made the politicians angry as it was not expensive enough, so they drove up the price. They forced upon the TTC UTDC's ICTS system and ditched the CLRV streetcars. This ensured the project was going to go over budget. Meanwhile, politicians were forcing planners to find other possible areas to give this expensive system to. This included Shepherd Avenue, Eglinton Avenue, downtown Toronto, and of course, Bessarion Road. In the years since, Bessarion became a run-of-the-mill normal road, but had grown into a massive run-of-the-mill road. Though there were more transit connections, the 84 bus became the 85 Shepherd East. There was also the 51 Leslie, Oriole Go, and though a bit far, Shepherd Station on the Yonge Line opened in 1974. These modes provided more ways for locals to get around, however, not to all places. The locals were not happy about getting from their houses and walking to Talara Park. From the harsh winters to the brutal summer heat, they wanted a faster and more global city way to reach it. Though most of the residents had cars and the route would have been a bus route, it was not worth the gas, and again, a bus. Who likes those? Nobody! And thus a rapid transit line was needed. Many of the comments towards it were, why encourage car traffic? Torontonians deserve the gold standard of transit. Think of the children. To the residents and the politicians looking for a massively expensive project, this seemed to fit the bill. Planners then drew out and proposed the line from scratch as they could not locate the candy wrapper in the dump. Like before, it would run from the proposed Shepherd Line connection station at the top of Bessarion, run parallel to the road before turning west into Talara Park where the terminus station would have been built. They wanted to use the expensive ICTS technology. But when the Scarborough RT opened, and the system suffered many technical issues, even over budget, supporting it would not get them votes, so it was back to a subway. The plan was called Network 2011, as the project was to be fully done by then, which even to that end was too optimistic by Toronto terms. This meant that Shepherd and Bessarion would use subways, with another subway line supporting it. This meant that it would be a connection to the main system and trains could be housed at Davisville Yard on the Yonge Line. But the line was, well, just a line at this point. Now how would they connect both Shepherd and Bessarion? Well, no one knows exactly now, not even the planners. They were more focused on the line itself rather than any real designs. However, rumors of a lower Bessarion station still persist. However, it was not the only underdog at the time. North York itself and its downtown were massively expanding. So much so that the mayor of North York at the time, Mel Lastman, convinced the TTC to build a station in the middle of it, at North York Center. With this newfound power, he would also use it to get the Shepherd Line built, regardless of critics who said that it would have worked better as an LRT. Subway is what he wanted, and Subway was what he will get. This worked wonders for the Bessarion Line project. as if Shepherd was built, its line would also get built as well. Lastman was determined to get the Shepherd line built, but Shepherd would be built because nobody will stop this project. Then Mike Harris came along. In 1995, he was elected Premier of Ontario and started to cut back massively on public transit. The first major cut was the Eglinton West subway, which only had a small hole built before getting the plug pulled. This meant bad news for the two lines in North York. The Shepherd line was already under fire, as its Phase 2 routing to the recently opened Downsview Station and Scarborough Town Centre were now up in the air, and even worse, the Phase 1 section from Yonge Street to Don Mills was also on the cutting table. One station, Willowdale, was cut, while two other stations were next in the line, Leslie Station and most paramount of all, Bessarion. But in any case, the associated line would still be built without Bessarion. The line would now run from Talara Park, and right before meeting the Shepherd line, it would stop and go back. Funds from these rides would go towards a future Bessarion station. But luckily, these cuts never happened. But unfortunately, those working on the project were given an ultimatum. Go with the Bessarion line or get 2 extra Shepherd line stations. They went with the latter. Again in history, it was pushed aside, and the residents would have to deal with 1 station rather than 3. In 2002, the Shepherd line would open with 4 stations and no Bessarion subway. Though it was an expensive line, other projects were taken priority, like a subway to York University, which meant all the extensions on it were put on hold, thus putting it in the limbo which it currently still sits. Like with the Scarborough RT, many have used the Shepherd line as a moral to building subways in areas that don't need it, when it really should have been built in areas that needed it, like Bessarion. But even that was starting to get doubts. Despite the lack of a subway line, the station was massively popular, so much so that it granted a legendary status for being so popular. In 2007, a new transit plan with an even more gimmicky name, named Transit City, came up with 2 innovations. 1! It did not have a date, so even if it did get built, it wouldn't need to worry about a deadline. And 2! It used light rail technology and bus rapid transit systems, but nobody talks about that part of the plan, which had improved over the last decades and was starting to get credibility. It brought back the Eglinton West subway as the Eglinton Crosstown line, but it had one major flaw: no Bessarion line. What? Because of this misstep, political support for the line fell through and the project was cancelled.
You failed!
In the 2010s, the line started to get more and more attention, though there was some minor swabble in Scarborough over the RT line and wanting to replace it with either a LRT or a subway. However, it was given little attention. But the residents of Bessarion had had enough, and they wanted something now. Many media companies dove in and started writing article after article on how bad it was, and how Toronto was the only city dealing with this because no other city on the planet ever has trouble with transit. Even so, Toronto does it worse, because it's Toronto. As the bad cinematics went on, a new challenger came in. Some residents and urban planners felt that a subway was too much and didn't serve all of the street well. It did get 2 major points, but it was still a long walk to both stations. So a new plan came up, the Bessarion LRT, which was like the subway plan, but included an extra stop at Caracas Road and used light rail technology. The media immediately jumped on this plan.
I love it!
However, many other residents held out and happily supported a subway, as it was meant to be there in the first place, and since they were promised that line, they expected it. Even though nothing has been built yet, the amount of attention it got has been a win for both the media and politics, as not only does it get them an airtime, but also as inflation grows, it makes the project even more and more expensive. So whenever it gets built, it will be twice as expensive. There are even plans for more, with an extension to Burbank Drive north towards Willowdale, off-lease Dog Park, and south to Harrison Park. Despite the line being in limbo, the area around the site has benefited from what was built for the Shepherd line, with more condos being built around its stations like Bessarion. Though many who own these condos have cars, many still use the subway for everything else. And with the subway being there, many realtors use it as a selling point, with steps from the TTC actually meaning steps away from the subway, and not referring to some random bus stop. But time is ticking away. As the Bessarion line sits in limbo, The swings are getting rustier and rustier, and if we keep going back and forth on this and get nothing done, nobody will get to ride the swings. Though, to be honest, this will never get built. Let's hope you didn't take too much of that to heart, as it was meant to be in good spirit. It's been a hell of a year, but instead of starting in January, let's start it now. We have more videos on the way. Even though we are a bit away from the end of the tunnel, please stay safe and have a happy 2021. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe for more content. Also, don't forget to check us out on Twitter, Facebook, and our website for more transit content made by enthusiasts, for enthusiasts, and everyone else. And if you'd like to see more from me specifically, feel free to subscribe to my channel, Exploring Toronto, link in the description. But once again, thanks for watching, and stay safe everyone.